Israel is fighting a death cult. This is jihadist. This is a religious war. This is not a territorial war.
You are asking Hamas, on the one hand, to hand over the hostages without any conditions. And then you're saying, but we will continue to destroy you. Why would they give up their bargaining chips?
I don't think you really understand what's the true nature of those radicals, of those jihadists, if you continue to actually, defend them.
No, I'm not defending anyone, Sharon. Don't put any words in my mouth. The Prime Minister said over the weekend, the Israeli plan now is to implement the Donald Trump plan of evacuating Gaza. Do you think that's reasonable? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy. My guest today is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Sharon Haskell. Now, Sharon is from the New Hope Party, but she is part of the coalition of Benjamin Netanyahu. And we're doing this interview as Israel is under intense criticism after the bodies of 15 emergency workers have been discovered dead in southern Gaza. 8 of them are Red Crescent workers. There is one UN employee, and there's been criticism from the International Committee of the Red Cross and other organizations. And this weekend, of course, the Prime Minister Netanyahu said his intention was to implement the Trump plan. Sharon, let's begin with these bodies that have been found in southern Gaza. Should there be an investigation, and why is Israel killing emergency workers?
So this is absolutely incorrect. There has been no such case like that. But
how do you know?
There have been mistakes, the events with the Central World Kitchen, that's been a grave mistake. But the fact is, I don't know what case you're referring to, but every event that you get from Hamas, you don't take it with a grain of salt. You take it with a shovel of salt. Hamas has been spreading propaganda since day one.
I'm not talking about Hamas. I'm talking about the Red Crescent.
Hold on. A research center, from London actually provide information and evidence how Hamas is inflating number, how they're actually reducing the age of some of the victims.
You're not disputing that 15 bodies have been found, have you? Or that 8 of them are Red Crescent workers?
Look, I think that if I haven't heard about this case, look, every case that actually happened, we investigate in depth, If there's an investigation happening regarding a case, I would be very short and very cautious about making declarative and statements, as we've heard before. Many of these revelations have been found not just as fake, but some as propaganda, Hamas propaganda.
But the International Committee of the Red Cross is condemning these killings and saying there are 8 Red Crescent workers who are dead. There is a total of 15 bodies that have been found. And you're not disputing the facts here, are you?
Well, I'm actually disputing the sources of many allegations that actually had come through the last year and a half, and we know many.
I'm talking about this case. I'm not talking about all the others.
And I'm talking not just about this case, but in many other cases. The fact is that their sources of information was in fact Hamas. This is including, the incidents in a hospital where they actually blamed Israel for it. And many broadcasts, including the BBC and many other reliable outlets, actually reported falsely because that Hamas is spreading misinformation and propaganda.
Okay, but let me just be clear, because the source of this is not Hamas. The source of this is Jonathan Whittle.
You want to tell me that the Red Cross is the one that actually went into the area and actually investigated
the ICRC can't do that because you don't let them.
Then you need to understand that almost all this information is coming from the same source, which is Hamas.
Do you not think
Hamas
these sorts of killings?
This information, you don't take it with a grain of salt. But you take it with a shovel of salt.
But do you not think these sorts of killings are the reason?
Propaganda. This is part of their goal of war. So, look, I would be very, very cautious in making grandiose statement like you did just now.
No, I'm
before
quoting.
Israel
I'm quoting internationally respected organizations like the ICRC and the UN OCHA Humanitarian Affairs
and I'm sure you
Department.
also
Now, Jonathan
quoted
Whittle,
very reliable sources like the BBC in the past in regards to the hospital, that it wasn't Israel that attacked, but it was Hamas that attacked.
Hold on. Jonathan Whittle, who was the head of OCHA in Palestine, said 7 days ago, civil defense and PRCS ambulances arrived at the scene of Israeli attacks. One by one, they were hit, they were struck, their bodies were gathered and buried in a mass grave. And now,
so the first
that's
thing
not
I would
Hamas.
say, I would ask you who actually investigated this event. And I would tell you, most likely it is Hamas, because OCHA won't be on the ground investigating it. So when they get their information from Hamas, a death-cult terrorist organization, as I said before, I won't take it just with a grain of salt. I would take it with a shovel of salt. I would wait until Israel actually investigate to check what had actually happened, because in most of these cases where it's pure Hamas propaganda, afterwards, the finding are actually that some of them were committed by Hamas, some of them were committed by other terrorist organizations, and so the fact that reliable or reputable journalists are very quick to judge and to propagate Hamas propaganda and to spread those lies, Hamas lies, over international media outlet and in their news agencies, that's very sad. That means that your work is not thorough. It's not going in depth in actually investigating what had actually happened there.
The trouble is the IDF has done this before, as you say, in the World Central Kitchen case. There have been lots of cases in which the IDF kills people who are clearly not legitimate targets. And who is being held responsible for these? Who's being held accountable?
No,
has there been a prosecution over any of these?
Look, this is absolutely absurd. And your accusations are actually going hand in hand with Hamas propaganda. And I'll tell you what.
It's just a fact, isn't it? You quoted it yourself.
The World Central Kitchen tragedy was a tragedy. It was investigated thoroughly. And you know what else? Australia, the Australian foreign minister, has actually sent a military representative into Israel to investigate in depth that particular incident. Okay, what did they discover? And did you read the report that they actually pulled out? They stated clearly, not an Israeli investigation, but an independent Australian investigation who went in to the heart of the military to watch live footage, unedited footage, to actually make their conclusion. And their conclusion was very clear that that was a mistake. It was unintentionally. And we've actually investigated afterward. People were laid off and pushed out. And we made procedure more accurate to make sure that those mistakes don't happen.
But they do, don't they? Because there are 8 Red Crescent workers dead.
Absolutely no. And if you have any kind of integrity as well, you will state that to your audience that Israel is never doing those things intentionally.
Well, we don't know that. That's the trouble.
Oh, yes, you know that. The fact is that you're not honest enough to say that to your audience.
Where is your proof that it's not intentional?
Well, obviously, even a report by an independent Australian military representative from the Australian government who came in and investigated.
I'm talking about this case, Sharon.
Very clearly. Well, I tell you, this is not a single case. These are in all the cases. And if you can show me even one case where it was proven that was intentionally, you can't.
You can't, because you don't allow investigators into all of these cases.
To your audience, that's the problem.
Well, will you allow independent investigators into this case here of 15 humanitarian workers, including 8 Red Crescent workers dead?
Well, first of all, we constantly are letting independent people coming and investigating that, including an Australian investigation.
Will you allow them into this?
Done in the World Central Kitchen.
Will you allow
the first thing I will tell you, this will be investigated by the Israeli authorities.
Which is not independent and not impartial.
But I can pretty clearly tell you that in many events like that, like in the past, usually it turns out as pure Hamas propaganda. And I really hope you have the decency then when that will be revealed to actually apologize for it and tell the truth to your audience as well.
If there's an independent investigation, obviously we will report the results of it, but there isn't going to be.
Well, would you apologize now about what you stated about the World Central Kitchen, about that being intentionally?
I haven't said that was intentional. I've said you've killed people several times, and you've killed tens of thousands of
That's what you said, and you should apologize for it because there isn't a single case that actually showed that and proved that.
The fact is that you do kill people, and it remains to be seen whether it is done on the whole with intent. It remains to be seen in this case whether it was done with intent or not, and we'll know if there is an independent investigation. But let's move on.
Well, there's been independent investigation throughout this entire year and a half.
There hasn't.
But journalists like you that are actually recruited to a political agenda, you know what? I don't expect anything from you. I really hope you apologize and you have the integrity to actually tell your audience the truth.
Right.
And I'll tell you what else. Were there people killed? Yes. Is it a tragedy? Of course it is a tragedy. Did we choose it? No, we did. Israel did anything and everything in its capability to try and avoid war because Israel knows what the cost for it.
Well,
but unfortunately, we are fighting an enemy who's a death cult, who's being shielding behind children, who has murdered, raped, beheaded, and burnt alive thousands of our people.
Let's move on to the
death cult that we're actually fighting against. What did you expect that's going to happen after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust? Are we able to defend ourselves? Do you think we have the right to defend our children against rape?
Well, let's move on to this question then of the resumption of the war.
Alive, because this is a war about our capability of defending our communities and our children. That's what it's about.
Move on.
And the responsibility on those deaths relies on the hands of Hamas and Hamas only.
Well, let's move on to the question of the resumption of the fighting.
I want to say one more thing.
No, hold on, Sharon, hold on. We'll get to all of that.
And we gave them, we gave them an opportunity.
No, Sharon, look, this has got to be an interview. It can't be a speech. So look, let me ask you some questions.
Surrender our hostages.
Yeah, let me ask you some questions. Let's come to the resumption of the war and Israel's breaking of the ceasefire. There are hostage families out there protesting. There was one of the most famous hostages on television last night saying this is wrong, that this is going to make the likelihood of more hostages being killed increased. Why are they wrong?
Well, first of all, Israel is a democracy. And there's freedom of speech, and everyone can say their viewpoint and their opinion, and that's the beauty about Israel.
Yeah,
there's a free speech here,
why are they wrong?
Everyone can actually speak their minds, and we're very grateful for that. The fact is that the return of the hostages, they came back because of two main reasons. One of them is the military pressure, and the second one is the Trump pressure that they put on. Trump came with a full declaration saying you either release the hostages, okay, or, hell will break loose. And for the first time, there was international pressure on Hamas to actually advance with a ceasefire because the deal that was signed, that was, very similar to a deal that was proposed by Russia, another proposal by Qatar, and another proposal by Egypt, which Israel said yes to all. But the fact is that only through a military pressure and international proper pressure on Hamas, that's what's brought it. And
yeah, but you've broken the ceasefire now, and Yarden Bibas, whose family were killed, says you're going to make the deaths of more hostages more likely by breaking the ceasefire and continuing to fight. And he knows because he's been there.
His words were that Trump's need to put pressure to end the war.
Yeah.
Okay? And that the hostages are constantly under danger.
And he thinks
it
the
is
return to war is a disaster.
And you know what? I wish Hamas was a reasonable party or entity that you can reason with and continue with another ceasefire.
Yes, but you're the ones who've broken the ceasefire.
The ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire ended on the 1st of March. It was only and until the 18th of March, after we ended the legal and the document that we've signed is that the temporary ceasefire was until the 1st of March. And on the 1st of March, there was a proposal, Witkoff proposal, to extend the ceasefire, which Hamas declined. We've waited for 18 days, almost 3 weeks, in the hope that Hamas will reason and will actually continue in an extension of that ceasefire, but they refused.
Well, Hamas says it's now agreed to a new ceasefire proposal, doesn't it?
Well,
which
Hamas
involves 5 hostages, which is less than the Witkoff proposal, but it does involve the release of more hostages. Why is that not enough?
Well, first of all, this is a new proposal that was put on the table, and we've actually put a counter proposal. We want 10 of our hostages back. Can't you get it? We want all of our family back as quickly and as safely as possible. Every single day they spend in those dungeons of torture with those lunatic, with that death cult, they are at risk of being murdered. And so
yeah, but the argument that the hostages are making,
as many as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but the argument that Yarden Bibas and other hostage families are making is that you are prolonging this. There is an offer on the table to bring more hostages home in return for a ceasefire extension, and you are rejecting that and currently bombing and telling people to get out of Rafah.
The fact is that if we would have rejected these things, we would have said no to Witkoff proposal. We would have said no and won't send delegation.
But you are bombing right now, aren't you?
There are Israeli delegation who are constantly talking about it. Israel's accepted 2 different proposals by Witkoff. And when Hamas come with very extreme condition, we will put a counter proposition to make sure that more hostages are being released. I mean, this is just reasonable. We need to bring them back as quickly as possible.
Well, you say it's reasonable, but the Prime Minister has said...
hold on.
No, hang on. We've got to move on a little bit. I mean, the Prime Minister said over the weekend that the Israeli plan now is to implement the Donald Trump plan of evacuating Gaza. Do you think that's reasonable?
Well, I think, first of all, look, that's not the plan. You can interpret it however you see it.
Well, the Prime Minister said it.
The fact is, and what the Prime Minister actually said, is that anyone who really wants to immigrate out of Gaza, out of the hell that Hamas has created there, okay, should have the opportunity to immigrate out. And you know what? I wish that some in the international community would have given refuge to women and children in Gaza while the war against Hamas is actually happening.
The Prime Minister said you're going ahead with the Trump plan. Now, the Trump plan is to evacuate Gaza and to not allow them back and to redevelop it as the Gaza Riviera. Do you see that as a reasonable plan?
No, but you know, you're making statements that are incorrect.
No, that is the Trump plan. And the Prime Minister said that you're not hiding it anymore. You are now talking about the Trump plan.
You might be interpreted that way, okay? But
well, how do you interpret the Trump plan?
Well, no, I don't interpret it. I look on what the Prime Minister said. And he said, first of all, voluntary immigration, which means anyone that wants to immigrate out of Gaza should be able to find refuge somewhere else. This is a voluntary immigration. The second thing that Trump actually said is actually temporary refuge while they rebuild Gaza. Okay, and it's important to be very accurate with what President Trump actually said, because when you're pushing your narrative, it creates a completely different picture.
Well, he was also asked, can they go back? And he said no.
And no.
He did.
You know,
he was specifically asked, can they go back? And he said no.
And well, when he was asked, and what I heard from his interviews, when he was asked whether they'll be able to come back, he said after they actually rebuild Gaza. That's an answer that I heard.
When did Donald Trump say that? He didn't say that.
He said that, I think it was in January when he made, or January or February when he made that proposal. Okay, I can send it to you if you'd like to.
I mean, Donald Trump is on the
But-
record as having been asked, can they go back? And he said, no, they can't, because they'll be building
Well,
new
I-
communities somewhere else. It was then walked back by other officials who then suggested
So I
maybe
can
people would
send
be able to
you-
go back, but the president didn't say that himself.
So
Anyway, that's
I
interesting.
can
It's
send
interesting that you think
but
it's temporary.
I
So-
don't know whether you actually speak about the voluntary immigration, where they actually relocate them to where they actually voluntarily want to immigrate.
Well, let's just explore
But the
that.
fact is, from what I heard, his answer is that they will have a temporary refuge while he rebuilds Gaza.
Right, but the question is sort of what kind of voluntary emigration is it when it's done under bombardment? You know, the suspicion is that what you are doing to the Palestinian people is making their lives so untenable, destroying the whole place, forcing them into a small part of Gaza, ordering them to evacuate Rafah, that, you know, the choice is not a real choice. You know, the choice is
Well,
either stay and be
it's very
bombed
funny how
leave.
you actually distort the actual fact, as if it's actually Israel's fault. The fact is that Hamas has turned Gaza into a hell. Hamas is the one that has stole all the resources throughout years, billions of dollars who were invested in Gaza.
This is a separate question,
and stole
and it's a
it. Hold on,
deflection.
they stole
I'm
it.
talking about the
They
actual
stole
reality.
it to arm themselves and to build a city of tunnel underneath Gaza. If they would invest that in the economy, into education, into infrastructure, the first thing, Gaza would have looked different.
Yeah.
And the second thing is when Hamas launched the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust on the 7th of October, that was a full declaration of war. That what did Hamas expected to happen after they kidnapped more than 250 people, including babies, out of their bed?
Sharon, can I bring you back to the question? Because all of this may be.
It means they declared war.
Yeah, but
and when you
let me bring you back to the question.
Don't come and cry over about it. You cannot turn the fact and say it's Israel's fault. In turning that into it, it actually Hamas responsibility.
Yeah, but I want to bring you back to the question
only
of
on the hands of Hamas. And if
what
you
you
want to
call
talk about the
voluntary
responsibility
emigration.
of why Gaza is a place like it is right now, this is Hamas, and put the responsibility on the entity that actually needs to be responsible for that. The second thing
can you
is
just address the question, which is
citizens protesting against Hamas in the last week.
Yeah. I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to that. No, don't worry. We're going to come to that.
And protest against those murderers risking their life.
Yeah.
And actually going out in the streets and demanding
Just hold on a second.
Hamas
Just hold on a second so we can do one thing at a time. The question is, what does voluntary emigration mean if it is done under bombardment and when people have been ordered to evacuate from large populated areas and are crammed into one small part of Gaza? That's not a real choice, is it? Because the choice is misery and possibly being bombed or escaping for your life. That's not a real choice around voluntary emigration, is it?
You know what? There's another option. You should raise that to the interviews that you interview maybe from the Palestinian side. Why don't Hamas disarm itself and actually return the hostages?
Again,
if they
Sharon, you're not answering the question, you're deflecting.
The war will end.
Could you address the question?
Hold on. But I am addressing it.
No, you're not.
And I address it in the correct manner.
You're addressing it by raising another point.
That the war can end tomorrow if they release the hostages.
Can it?
Why don't we talk? Of course.
Are you saying the war would end tomorrow?
We want a war. We didn't want a war.
Okay. If Hamas released all the hostages, you're saying the war would end?
If Hamas disarm itself and release all the hostages, the war is over.
No, because they would still be in place.
Not a single,
your stated war aim is to remove Hamas and to destroy them. Are you saying you would drop that aim if they let go of the hostages?
Hold on. If Hamas disarm itself and if Hamas release all the hostages, the war will be over. The problem is that Hamas refuses.
So you're adding in disarming themselves. But are you saying Hamas can continue to be the civil administration?
Do you think as a representative, as someone who represents the Israeli people, I can allow a death cult, terrorist organization that committed the worst crimes against humanity, against my people, abducted more than 250 people, and let them return armed 200 meters from our town so that they can commit those crimes again?
I'm
Do you think
scrutinizing your
that's
claim that the war would
reasonable
end
in
tomorrow.
any world?
I'm pointing out that
Sorry?
I'm scrutinizing your claim that the war would end tomorrow if they handed over the hostages. It's clear that it wouldn't end because
Well, they
you
would-
also
no.
you also want them to hand over their weapons. Are you saying if they handed over their weapons but stayed in power as the civil administration, that would be fine with Israel?
No, it
Exactly.
won't be fine with
So the
Israel,
war would not
but
end,
they
would it?
won't. There won't be a war. It means that we can start talking about diplomatic solutions. You want the bombardments to stop. The bombardments are what annoys you. Yeah. So there's two conditions to that: disarm and return our family members.
Would you
That's it.
stop the
And
bombing
that would be behind us.
if the hostages were handed over? Clearly not. That's the
Well,
trouble with your position, that you say they can end the war
So
tomorrow
you say,
by handing over the
so
hostages.
you want to tell me that the problem with my position is that, you know, a monster death cult can be 200 meters armed, 200 meters from a kindergarten in my community.
No, I'm
You think that-
I'm
you
not
think
I'm
that
not
that's
arguing
okay?
one way or another.
You think that when they raped young girls in Israel, I can allow them to return and actually try and do that again? Because they state that in any opportunity, they will try
Yeah.
to do that over and over and over again. So you tell me that you want my daughters to be at the risk every
No,
single
I'm not
day
telling you
to
anything
be
like that.
murdered, raped,
I'm not
and
telling you
burned,
anything like that.
okay?
What I'm
So
pointing
that
out
you
is
can have this ideal of keeping this terrorist organization in Gaza. You want,
what I'm
would
pointing
you let
out
your daughters
is that
leave
this is not
200
true.
meters from that stealth cult?
Sharon, I'm
You
not saying
tell
any
me,
of that. I'm not saying any of that.
would you,
What I'm pointing
would
out.
you let,
Hold on,
you
hold on,
let
hold
your
on, hold on.
daughters leave 200 meters from that death
I'm not
cult?
arguing
Would
that you should. I'm not arguing that you should. What I'm
Or
saying is it is
you
not.
do.
What I'm saying is it is not true to say that the war would end if they handed over the hostages. This is a refrain that you keep using, but it's clearly not true, because what you want to do is destroy Hamas. Now, you may have good reasons for that, which are the ones that you have expressed, but it is you can't have it both ways.
Are you hearing? Do you hear what you're actually saying? I mean, seriously, this is. I mean,
What I'm saying
I
is
just
you
don't-
keep claiming
I
the
just
war could
don't
be
get
over,
it.
and it's not true, because you've just explained why it's not true. Because you would keep
Look.
going until you had destroyed Hamas or Hamas had left.
Look, I think you actually don't really get the reality of what's happening in the Middle East. Israel is fighting a death cult. This is jihadist. This is a religious war. This is not a territorial war. It is a religious war against a death cult. And you want to tell me that it is okay for my daughters to actually be neighboring 200 meters from those monsters that have stated that they will attempt
No, I'm
every
not.
single day to come back and rape
you keep
and murder
saying
and burn them alive.
you keep
Because
constructing
you
a
need
fake
to
argument that
understand
I'm
that
making, and
in
I'm not.
our tough neighborhood, what you saw in Syria with the Alawats, okay, just a few weeks ago, what you saw in Gaza, this is the enemies and the monsters that Israel's actually
Yeah.
facing.
But Sharon,
And when
I'm not arguing
and when
one way or
I
another.
say I want to disarm Hamas, I don't know how you interpret it differently than I want peace and good neighboring. That's the meaning of disarming a terrorist organization that actually took all the resources of the international community who were invested in Gaza and committed them to war and destruction.
let me just ask you a question.
If we want ever in the future to have peace and stability and good neighboring, this terrorist organization has to be eradicated.
Yeah.
They don't just
Sharon, let me just ask you a question though, which comes back to this
point. They don't care for
point.
the Israeli lives, but they don't care for the Palestinian lives either.
But the reason this is important is because you are asking Hamas on the one hand to hand over the hostages without any conditions, and then you're saying, but we will continue to destroy you. Why would they give up their bargaining chips if you still say you cannot stay in power, you must leave, you must give up your weapons, or we will kill you? That's the problem you're in right now, isn't it? When it comes to these negotiations, Hamas is holding on to its hostages as bargaining chips, and you are offering them nothing, no reason to hand them over, because you're not offering them any kind of say in the future.
Look, Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's a death cult. It didn't just destroy Israeli community, but it destroys everyday Palestinian communities. And when you're dealing, and you know, maybe you have more military experience, maybe you have more military strategy on how to fight terrorist organizations and radicals, maybe you should come and advise the Israeli military, you know?
I'm
But
just
the
asking you
fact
to
is,
address that point.
I-
Why do you
I
think
served
Hamas
as a
will hand
combat
over the
soldier.
hostages?
I actually saw what is the result of those monsters. I've
Yeah.
seen it.
And I want to ask you about
firsthand.
that, if we can get
And
beyond
so
this.
I want to tell you this, okay? If that doesn't happen, if I don't disarm Hamas, then maybe in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I'm not going to have 250 family members being held in those dungeons of torture. I can have 500, 800, 1,000. And this is something that my people, a problem that I don't want my daughters to actually face in the future. And I don't think you get that. I don't think you really understand what's the true nature of those radicals, of those jihadists, if you continue to actually, you know, defend them.
No, I'm not defending anyone, Sharon. Don't put any words in my mouth. I'm asking you.
But you
I'm
do.
asking you. No, I'm not. I'm not, and it's very important you accept
some
that.
of their propaganda.
No, I'm not propagating any propaganda. I'm asking you questions, Sharon, and you can turn this around into your talking points, but you've got to address my questions. My question is,
I am addressing
no, you're
your
not.
questions.
No, you're not. You're just attacking.
I don't think
you are just
what
attacking.
We're actually experiencing
no, you're
here.
just attacking, and that you know we've got to try and get beyond that, because what I'm trying to ask you is why you think Hamas will hand over the hostages if your stated position is still that you want to destroy them.
Well, the fact is that if we put military pressure and international pressure, that's pressure Hamas in handing out our family members. That's the fact. That's what worked until now and nothing else. Okay? The fact is when we reduced the amount of the maneuvering of our operations in Gaza, and we went into a quiet ceasefire, not a single Hamas official even went around the negotiation table. They didn't want to hear about it. It was only when we started resuming military operation, and only when the international community, through Trump, actually put the right pressure on Hamas, that's when they caved in, and they actually even started sending the delegation to Doha to start these negotiations. So from our experience, military experience, negotiating experience, this is the only pressure that actually works on Hamas.
Okay,
and
so
this is the only way to actually create a more stable future for Israelis and for Palestinians.
Well, can we then talk about what that future might be? What is your personal position? Because obviously you're not in the same party as Benjamin Netanyahu. You don't necessarily think he is the best person to be prime minister in an eventual scenario. But what is your personal view around the future of these Palestinian territories? Is it the Trump plan? Is it a two-state solution? Or is it something else?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that every plan that was tried until now has failed. And the people who actually paid the worst price is the Israeli people. Through the Oslo Accord, where, you know, the terrorist attacks started to happen in Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jerusalem, in the heart of Israel, where they actually sent suicide bombers into clubs and restaurants and bars. And when we disengaged from Gaza, we gave them a territory. We gave them an autonomy. And a few days after, they've elected a terrorist organization to rule them. And since then, our communities were hit by missiles, people were murdered, and it ended up with the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
So what do you think the future is?
I think that, you know, some of the solutions of Trump that are outside of the box are actually very positive. I think that bringing new ideas that can actually create stability and real coexistence and bridges That's something that we have to consider, because every solution that was suggested until now, that was pushed on Israel until now, have completely failed, and we are the one to pay the price.
But what if they don't
And so,
voluntarily go? You know, you're
well,
talking about voluntary emigration at the moment. They're not
look,
showing any sign of it. What if they don't? Then what?
well, first of all, I think it's too early to tell. And the second thing is, I think that, after Trump's declaration and thought outside of the box, for the first time after a year and a half, finally, the Arab countries and the Arab leagues actually joined together to start discussing what can happen the day after. So that pressure that Trump's actually put with different idea, I welcome it, because it actually put the international community, the Arab community, in a point where it forced them to start having a real discussion about the day after.
Well, that's really interesting.
It's not necessarily up to Israel.
Because you're not really taking the Trump plan on face value then, are you? You're not really saying that is the real plan. You're saying there's some other future that will be discussed with Israel's neighbors. Well, and the question is what that other future might be.
I'll tell you two things. The first one, I think it's too early to say.
Why?
And I think that every idea is welcome, and we have to discuss it, and we have to look to the reality in its face and to discuss those ideas straight.
But you know that voluntary emigration is not a real idea.
Arab League, do I think that the proposition that the Arab League brought is the right proposition? No, but at least we are starting a discussion. And it's not going to be just up to Israel, but this is going to be an international discussion, because it's not just our responsibility.
Let's talk about leadership in Israel then, because again, you're in a different party, you're in the New Hope party, and you wanted Gideon Saar to be prime minister. You currently have a prime minister in Benjamin Netanyahu who is wanted for war crimes, who is facing corruption charges at home, who is facing protests. Do you think there is a future without him in Israel in the foreseeable future? Do you think he should be replaced by someone who can bring the country together?
Well, I don't think this is the decision for the Israeli court, and this is not the decision for the international court. This is the sovereign decision of the Israeli people, and Israel is a strong democracy. It's a vibrant democracy. Yes, is there demonstrations? Of course, good. Is there freedom of speech? Good. Do they criticize the government? This is part of the process of what a democracy really should be.
Do you still think Mr. Saar would be a better prime minister?
I think that it is up to the Israeli people to make the decision who's going to lead them and who's going to be their prime minister. And more so, unfortunately, the ICC and the ICJ has turned into a political tool in the hand of jihadists. They are trying to tie Israel's hand in the attempt to defend itself against one of the worst attacks against our country.
Who are the jihadists in the ICC and the ICJ?
Or they're being used as a political tool. That's, look.
Hang on, you said the ICC and the ICJ are in the hands of jihadists. Who are the jihadists?
I said they are being used as a political tool in their hands. Yes, if I can tell you.
Who are the jihadists?
Hold on. If I can tell you before the trial at the ICJ, I look on the judges, and I can tell you every single judge what their verdict is going to be before the trial was even open. It means it's political, okay? It's not about justice, but it's about politics. And if the head of the ICJ, after their verdict, a couple of months later, is being appointed as the prime minister of Lebanon, and his first statement is that Israel is an enemy state, I don't think he's objective. I'm sorry. So were they used as a political tool? Yes, absolutely. Do the ICC being used as a political tool? Unfortunately, yes. And I have to say, I'm very sad about it. I'm really sad. These are meant to be institutes to defend humanity, and they are being used as political tools.
Do you still think Gideon Saar would be a better prime minister?
Sorry?
Do you still think Gideon Saar would be a better prime minister?
I think this is not a discussion that we're having right now. And I think that when the elections are and when the nominations to the prime ministership are, I can answer you that as well. I think that right now, all of our political effort here in Israel have to be addressed to one thing and one thing only. And it is the survival of Israel. On the 7th of October, Israel was attacked in order to completely annihilate it and to genocide all of my people. The worst crimes against humanity were committed. We were attacked from 7 different fronts. And so all of our efforts should be addressed just for that, to defend our children and to defend our community.
Sharon Haskell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this edition of the Forecast. Bye-bye.